Hello, this is Book Talk on Book Place, and this is your host, Anthony Morore. And as always, we get to have a guest with us who discusses a book he has written or she has written. And today we are very blessed to have with us one known as Rodney McBride. Now, this is someone who's been having the experiences that he's going to be sharing with us for a long time. He's been a counselor, a mental health counselor, and he's also dealt with couples who had issues in their marriages or in their relationships. And he's come up with a book, and he's going to tell us all about the book, all about his work. And I believe that is going to be an interesting episode, this one. So without wasting more time, let me welcome Rodney to the show. Hi, Rodney. Welcome to this show.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be with you and to speak to your listeners. I appreciate the chance to meet with you.
Yeah, we are glad that you took your time to come and speak with us. And can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you were born, what you have been doing in the recent past?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm an Australian by birth.
Okay.
I've spent a large part of my life in Australia. And as you said, I've been a counsellor, psychologist for 33 years now.
That's quite a time.
Yes. So increasingly over the last few years, I've tended to specialise in organisations and helping staff to deal with stress and working in teams and working in multicultural organisations. So that's been a large part of my experience.
Okay.
And so that's brought me. I'm now based in Rome, in Italy.
Yeah.
So I work for an international organisation. But probably my other big passion, which brings me to you, my other real interest is in relationships and marriage. Although in its broadest sense, I know marriage usually suggests heterosexual, but I'm interested in all forms of committed relationships.
Okay.
And so for me, it doesn't have to be marriage, but I refer to it in my book as marriage, just to make it easy. So I've for probably 20 years now focused. That's been my other great interest. Is what do we know about committed relationships? In particular, what are we teaching our children about committed relationships? How are relationships changing over time?
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in the question of what do we want our children to know about their future relationships that is healthy and useful for them. So that's really the purpose for my writing this book.
Wow, that's a wonderful thing. And what's the title of the book, if we may have it?
Well, I started out writing a book about infidelity.
Okay.
But it was actually my daughter who suggested, Dad, maybe that's too much of a niche area. Maybe you're not going to attract enough readers if you just focus on infidelity.
Yeah.
As important as that is. So what I've done recently is expanded the book and retitled it.
Yeah.
It's now called Dealing with Marital Challenges.
Okay.
But the subtitle is A New Model for Healthy Relationships. And that's, I guess, what I'd be particularly interested to talk about.
Oh, that's wonderful. And when you mention about a daughter, that tells me that you have a family. So what you're talking about is something that you have experience of.
Yes, indeed.
So when you talk about challenges, some of the challenges you've been through, and some of the challenges you've seen your relations, I mean, your friends, your relatives go through them, and then you have some solutions for them. That's what
well, solutions. I have some things for us all to think about.
Yeah.
Particularly, well, I sometimes say young couples. Now, I'm not referring to young couples. I'm referring to new couples.
Yeah.
So I think there are certainly some issues or ideas for new couples to think about. And so that's really the main purpose of the book. I mean, as you probably know, Anthony, the data for first relationships, first marriages,
yeah,
is pretty poor. It's certainly in the US, in a lot of countries. What it's hard to get really accurate figures, but something like half of new relationships will end in divorce.
Yeah.
And something like half of those are going to end in the first 8 years. So couples start out well. I think we all start out well. But then for a variety of different reasons, they hit some roadblocks, they hit some hurdles. And the tragic part, I think, is that this 8-year business means that they're divorcing in the first 8 years. I mean, that for me, that's, what does that telling us? I think it's telling us that our preparation for longer term commitments is not as good as it could be. It's telling me that some of the assumptions that we make about difficulties that we're going to run into is not as, we're not as clever or as well informed as what we need to be. And then what we know is that the rate of second marriages is actually worse than the first. So it's actually a higher rate of divorce for second marriages than what it is for first. And so I think, what does that tell us? That tells us that taking our lessons learned into our first relationship is difficult. It's even worse when we take those lessons learned into our second and subsequent relationships. And so the purpose of my book is to say, let's think about what do we know and what could we do differently.
Oh, wonderful. And yes, that's quite interesting. And I know it's not only in the US, as you say, it's all around. I mean, initially in the earlier ages, people used to live, and once they get committed to a relationship, that was a long-term relationship. That is when actually the phrase "till death do us part" really meant something. And it's become a challenge in the recent years, and I believe it's because of the many challenges, and not only the challenges, even opportunities bring about the differences. That's what I want to believe. But you can tell us better, because as I see it, you might have some more experience that I have had in my life.
Well, so, you're absolutely right. I think society is very different. I mean, you were talking your cultural background, whether it's better in some of our cultures than others. But I certainly know in places like Australia, UK, US, our family bonds have broken down, or our family connectedness has broken down. Maybe that's not so in a lot of cultures, but where that's the case, in the past, our family connections kept us together. You know, I remember when I was growing up, we saw our extended family almost every weekend. Church was much stronger influence back when I was a child. Were our couples any happier back then? I don't know. You know, we could argue, maybe, but the bonds that kept them together were much stronger. I think that is a fact.
Okay.
You know, religious, even cultural attitudes, society attitudes, the laws around divorce, all the legal stuff has changed. But young people, younger people, are now moving away from families for jobs or for other reasons.
Yeah.
And so they haven't got that connectedness that we had. Now, good thing, bad thing, we're not sure. But I think it's a factor in they don't have that sort of reason or support to be together. Now, what we then tend to see is that a lot of these couples reach difficult times. I mentioned the first 8 years. In the first 8 years, the job situation might have changed, children might have come along. A big one that couples is we just start to put less effort into our relationship. We start to get bored. We start to get lazy in our relationships. And so what happens? We start to drift apart. And in the past, the connectedness, there would have been no question. Now, my grandmother would have been, around talking, to my parents and giving them a good, lecture about being a good husband and wife. The pressure to stay together would have been much greater. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily a good thing, but I think what we do know is that a lot of that 8-year business is probably, I would argue, is unnecessary, is unfortunate, and could be assisted by if we had a bit more support and a bit more guidance.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, in the present day, the couples or all those people who get into a relationship, a long-term relationship, are facing some challenges. You mentioned something to do with the changes that they experience in the first few years of their marriage or their relationship. And which challenges could those be? Which changes, what exact changes could have been influencing the negative effect on the family, on the relationship?
Yes, excellent question, Anthony. A big one that I see for couples, and it goes back to this definition of love. Most cultures, not all, but probably most, I would think, have a love model of coming together. The alternative is the arranged or family organized type of coming together. But most of our couples that we're talking about get together because we fall in love.
Yeah, initially in the olden days, it used to be through arranged. But although I hear that there are still some cultures that do arrange marriages even today, but mostly it's love, as you say.
Yes. So there's usually, from most of our cultures, it's left up to me, and if I fall in love, then I choose my partner.
Yeah.
And families go along with that. It is different in other cultures. In fact, I would argue that there's great value in arranged marriages. Matchmakers and parents getting together and deciding what's in the best interest of their children. I have absolutely full respect for those sorts of models.
Yeah.
But I think the majority that we're talking about is this love. Now, how do we define this love? And this is biological, and your listeners might be aware of this.
Yeah.
We originally defined love by attraction and excitement, and that sort of butterfly, that gooey, that I just can't wait to see my partner.
Yeah.
We define love like that, right? But what we know is, and science supports this idea, that that's a biological reaction, and that wears off. That stops after, they say, about 18 months, right? It has to stop. And so the idea, different writers refer to this in different ways, but we move from that sort of attraction, love, into something a bit more longer term, a bit more workable. Now, sometimes we think, oh, that's terribly unromantic. Why can't we have that, romance and excitement continue? And hopefully we can.
Yeah.
But I think it takes work. What we know is that it doesn't occur naturally. So the natural reaction that was intended to bring us together stops.
Yeah.
Now that's a major challenge for couples. Add to that other life circumstances, and so not now we're talking about perhaps stress, negative reactions, mood changes, and so now we've got that loss of that excitement combined with life matters, and so we're starting to see why couples divorce before 8 years is up. Because so many couples talk to me about the excitement has gone.
Yeah.
Right, it's finished. Therefore, there's something wrong with my marriage. Right, because I can't identify it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people, I remember very well, clearly, some years ago, they'd been married probably for a similar length of time. They had 3 young children. It was stale. It was no longer had that excitement. Along comes Miss Perfect, that the husband meets in the workplace. Suddenly, all that excitement is stirred up again. Excitement versus stale.
Yeah.
Which is right? And what feels right is my new soulmate. Oh, if only I'd met her, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm comparing 8 years or more with my wife.
Yes.
With this new, exciting, it's stirring up in me again, all those feelings that I defined as love. Right? It must be right. The 8 years must be wrong. Therefore, and hence we're introducing the subject. So it's the mistake is that we're not aware that in a year or 2 time, this excitement most likely is going to wear off with Miss Perfect as well.
Yes,
the pattern is going to repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the main challenges that we tend to see.
Okay.
For our definition of love. So in my book, I address the question of love.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't dismiss it. But it's not the basis of our relationship.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Okay.
Now, I had a client recently who described her. She got this from a French author, I believe. Okay. For me, we're all saying the same thing. She referred to it, am I in love or do I love my partner? Okay.
And what's
well, in my book, I use the term commitment.
Okay.
Am I in love? And hopefully, yes, I do. Hopefully I experience and we work towards it. It's a mutual thing with my partner. Hopefully we work towards as many positive, exciting, passion-filled times as possible. Hopefully that's the case. But if we're relying on that as the measure of our successful relationship, we will run into problems. And so either people get lazy or they go through tough times, difficult life challenges,
Yeah.
That's when they experience this marital confusion. I had a boss. I used to work in the federal police in Australia. I had a boss, and he talked about, so one of the life stresses I'm coming to is work stress.
Yeah.
And he talked about police changing their wives when what they should be doing is changing their jobs.
Okay.
Interesting. So we hit a point where it might be burnout, it might be just too much work, it might be affecting our mood. Who is the most likely to suffer that sort of a reaction? It's most likely going to be our wife, largely male police back then. It's going to take a toll on the relationship. The relationship is going to suffer, so we end the relationship rather than changing our job. So even back then, that was quite some years ago, he was aware of this back then, and it's still a factor now.
Yeah, so here you mentioned about us going into marriage with the idea of commitment and not the infatuation. That's what we call it.
Yes.
And those people who are not in a relationship already, this is the message that they should be getting. I mean, when you are getting into a relationship, shouldn't be based on your feeling and emotions, but it should be based on some principles that you are going to hold all your life.
Yes, Anthony, you're absolutely right. Although my son is about to get married, and I was having this discussion with him not too long ago, and he said, "Dad, that's a hard message to sell."
Yeah.
How can we tell, young in this case, but how can we tell young couples that what they're feeling is going to is not going to last?
Yeah.
Is that the message they want to hear? I actually, said, well, on our wedding days, in our wedding vows, we need to make our wedding vows realistic, right? We need to say, look, this idea about, I'll love you forever. There are times in which I'm going to struggle to say that with a straight face.
Yeah.
To say that honestly. There'll be moments. Now, hopefully I'll get through those moments, but there are going to be times in which I just don't feel that. And if we rely on that, then as a measure of whether our relationship is correct or not, is the right one, then we're going to come unstuck. So now that's the message we need to give to kids.
Yeah.
But how do we do it without dampening their enthusiasm? Because when in the early stages of their relationship, like all of us, it was pretty exciting and wonderful, and so it should be. But somehow we've also got to balance that with the message of, okay, but what you're doing is committing to each other. That commitment is the bottom line. Now you can change that, and I go into divorce as well in my book. You can change it, but let's be very clear that this passion and excitement is a wonderful experience, but it's not the only one that we're going to experience in this commitment to each other.
Yeah, and in that case, do you suggest that every committed couple, every person who wants to get into a long-term relationship should have to go through a course or something?
Excellent idea, Anthony. Yes. Yes, I do. Our preparations, and if we just think about traditional marriage just for a moment, I know we said at the start, we're not just talking about traditional marriage, but our preparation for traditional marriage is quite poor.
Yeah.
And in my book, I liken it to buying a house. Right? A house is a large financial commitment. People people criticize me for this line of thinking, but I'll share it with you anyway. You know, if we buy a house, if we're going to spend that amount of money of that length of 20 or 30 years, it's a big commitment, and the bank wants to make sure that we're serious.
Yeah.
That we've got the means to pay. Anyway, so the bank goes to great lengths to make sure that we understand what we're signing up to.
Yeah, sure.
Think about that in terms of a similar, probably even bigger life commitment called marriage. It's virtually, if you want to, if you want to get married, go right ahead. No problem.
Yeah.
Now, in the past, the churches did sort of had this idea. I remember when I got married, we met with the minister a few times.
Okay.
Did I learn anything from that? Looking back on it, probably not.
I guess you were too much in love by that time. You couldn't hear anything.
Probably right. Would I have listened anyway?
So that's the challenge.
Yeah. But what do we have? So that's why. Yes, I think an awareness of what we're signing up for, awareness of what are some of the challenges that we might encounter, and how we're going to deal with it is almost essential. So how many of those 8-year divorces can we save, if you like? I don't know, but I think it's a fairly large percentage. That'd be my best guess. And so I'm very interested in, can we do that? Because we know the effects of divorce are pretty bad.
Yeah, sure.
Particularly if children are on the scene. So can we avoid divorce? I think it's worth us trying to do so if we can.
Let me ask you a question. How long have you been married yourself?
I've been married for 35 years.
35 years.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa, that's so wonderful. To one wife?
One wife, yes. Good question. I'm glad you picked that.
So, and this is to everyone who's listening to this, those who are watching live and those who are going to watch the recorded version. You're listening to the right person who can help you.
Yes, but sometimes we think length of marriage is the key. Well, Dennis suggests that if you don't reach 35 years, therefore there's something wrong. Now that's not the case. And I can share with your listeners, my wife and I have, we've had some challenges of our own. We've reached points up and down where we've thought, what's going on here? So to say that 35 years is the goal or even longer, no, I don't believe that's the case. The other reason is, I think many couples, and I'm familiar with a large number of them, many couples, when do we get together? Well, the age is increasing in Australia, in the US. I think the average age is now sort of around 30 or 31 for marriage. I don't know what it
used to be quite younger in the past.
Quite young, exactly. Exactly. So if we think, even so, if we think mid-20s, what the partner that we need in our mid-20s may well be very different to the partner that we need in our when we reach 50. Yeah, sure. In other words, we've been married for 25 years. Is our partner still, are we meeting their needs? Are they meeting our needs? Or let me put another way. One of the key messages from my book is it's not love that we're going to be measuring with. It's going to be growth and change.
Okay.
Are we willing to support our partner's growth as an individual? Yeah. Are we willing to develop our own growth? And in particular, do we have a sense of ourselves as a couple? So I look at, I don't know if I can show your listeners. I look at interlocking circles. Okay. Right, but it has 3 sections. There's the me, there's the us, and there's the you. In these 3 segments of these circles. Yeah. And if we're going to make success of this, my definition says that we identify what's in each of our three segments and how are we going to grow that over time.
Yeah.
How am I going to grow myself as an individual, because that's part of my relationship? How am I going to support my partner to grow his or her individual part, because that's the other part of the relationship. But crucially, and this is probably my biggest message for your listeners, so many couples struggle to identify what's in the middle bit. What's the us?
Okay.
What do we have in that middle bit, and how are we growing?
That joins us together.
Yes. Yeah. Good way to put it. And so many couples, I ask them, tell me about the us, and we really don't know. Now, that's complicated by the fact that children may well come along.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at those first 8 years, then children are at their most dependent, take up so much of parents' time. The us tends to get neglected.
Yeah.
And so I use an example that without going into personal details, the children occupy so much of our couple time.
Yeah.
But children grow up. Children become teenagers. Children, some families that I think about, children might go away to boarding school. So suddenly we've got these two parents, husband and wife, for example, who have neglected the us for so long.
Yeah.
They look at each other kind of as strangers.
And I believe much of this happened during the COVID time when people are brought together and they leave, they are staying together for days, and then they start realizing, we don't know each other.
It's a very good, COVID is a whole nother layer of this, Anthony. I completely agree. We see a lot of marital distress during the COVID era. We actually see a lot of domestic violence in this period as well, marital violence. And so why? Well, there are a variety of reasons for it. Some is because we're spending 24/7 now with our partner, which we've never done before. Or maybe we've gone on holiday and we've spent 2 or 3 weeks with our partner 24/7. But I've been 24/7 with my wife for 12 months at least now. It adds a challenge. And so if there are tendencies there, if there are difficult ways of resolving things, and we're full, 24/7 with each other, locked down, the fact that we start to see violence is probably not unusual. Could be expected. And so, but it's a very difficult part of the experience that we're going through. But worldwide, I think we're seeing marital distress, we're seeing divorce, we're actually seeing infidelity, which I'm not quite sure how that's working. But we're certainly seeing domestic violence, and that's a major challenge for a lot of our societies.
It's unfortunate. And somewhere along the line, you mentioned about the commitment. I think maybe it's an example that you just used of putting some financial input, or rather spending together.
Right.
And, this is on matters to do with money.
Right.
How does that contribute in the relationship, and the challenges that people face in the relationships that you've handled along the years?
Yes. Money and relationships, goodness. Yeah, that's a tricky one. And again, under COVID, the traditional patterns that we might have experienced might have changed in this, in this last 12 months or so.
Yeah.
But equally, depending on the culture again, what my parents went through, the traditional roles, if you like. My father was the breadwinner.
Yeah.
My mother stayed home, raised us kids. Right, that's more or less was what we grew up with. But that's not the case for a lot of our couples.
Yeah.
Now, and I think we're better for it. Our female partners have their careers, and there's sort of mutual sharing of the financial income, mutual sharing of financial decisions. Interesting whether there's gender balance in the amount of money that we're earning. So that's another, I know, a stressful issue for couples or for societies. But I think certainly careers, financial independence, and how are we balancing that? Hopefully that's becoming more of the norm. But if that's different than what we grew up with, it's certainly different than what I grew up with. I learned the way I understood how couples operate is that the man earns the money, right? Yeah. The woman in traditional couples stays home and looks after the kids. How do I deal with that when my wife says now, 40 years later, well, no, that's not the way it's going to work. I need you to support me while I go out and develop my career, while I make changes in my living circumstances. Time spent apart, how do we do that without threatening the relationship? So this is what I mean. Perhaps the way we start off and the way we end up 20 years later might be two different things. We might decide that some of the assumptions I made when I was a 20-year-old aren't necessarily working for me now. Does that mean we've failed? No, it doesn't. It means that life has developed. Yeah. But hopefully, if we're looking at how do we make it work, then I realize I need to grow myself. I need to support my partner's growth in her. It might be life, it might be career, it might be education. That's healthy. And so if I can do that, then I think our relationships can survive. I don't know how many people I've spoken to who say, I get stuck. That's just me. I'll never change. Yeah. If we hear that, then I think we're headed for difficulty. Yeah. If we're going to say I don't see change as my role or my partner's change is my responsibility, then I'm a bit troubled by our future together.
Yeah, and someone once said that whatever stops to grow starts to decay. So where growth stops, decay starts. So if at one point you discover that you're not growing in some area, then it means you're headed to the wrong direction. You're headed south.
That's a very good summary, I think. Yes.
Yeah. On the matter of now, it's not all relationships that end up with with the children, descendants, or so to say. But mostly when we come together, we got to have some children. What about the challenges of bringing up children?
Oh my goodness. You certainly asked the challenging questions, Anthony. Challenges of bringing up children. Again, I'm going to go back to my book. In my book,
want to get what is inside the book.
yeah.
But don't give us everything so that we go for the book to get out the whole thing out of it.
That's very true. $9.99 on Amazon.
Okay, let's go back to the
very
so they're gonna get it from Amazon. So let's go back to the book and get it out of it. about the challenges of bringing up children.
Yes, well, I mentioned it in there because, again, so many couples that I've worked with, yeah, it's children are a wonderful, of course, you know, a highly magical and very important part of our relationship, but can be a high level of our distress as well. In my book, I encourage us to think about early on in our relationship. So this idea of what's going to stop us growing is what did we learn as children? And so I talk about healing our parents. And so what did we learn, and what lessons are useful, and what lessons are not useful?
Yeah.
And do we need to put aside? So that's us as adults. And so I'll give you an example, and it's an example I use in the book. And that is, so I'm not sure, I might have moved off your question a bit, but anyway, I'll come back to raising children in a minute. Again, a couple that I work with, she said that her parents had a wonderful relationship.
Yeah.
And I said, well, tell me more about this wonderful relationship. And she said, oh yes, my parents never argued. And I said, never argued?
Yeah.
And she said, not that I'm aware of. What she was struggling with in her adult relationship with her partner, is whenever they had an argument, she panicked because she'd never seen it resolved successfully. Right? She'd never learned that you can have, you know, even within limits. Within limits, you can have a ding dong, you know, discussion. There are limits to that, of course, as we've said already. But as long as we stick within those limits, fighting fair, I call it, the technique of fighting fair.
Yeah.
But we can really have significant differences and call it fighting, arguing. She'd never seen that, so she didn't realise that you could do that and successfully resolve it.
Yeah.
So fighting is not necessarily the big threat that she thought it was. So that's a lesson that she learned from her parents, one that was proving difficult in her relationship. But I've moved off your question of raising children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one. I mean, we carry that into how we raise our children as well.
Yeah.
But I think there are probably better authors on the question of raising children than myself. I'm particularly, you know, when I was raising, particularly my son, I'm particularly interested in the subject of raising boys.
Yeah. And
I direct your listeners' attention to an author by the name of Steve Biddulph, who's an Australian. He wrote a book called, I think it's Raising Boys. I think that's, if I'm quoting him correctly.
Okay.
But he addresses this issue as well, that what did we learn being men that served us well as fathers?
Yeah.
But what did we also learn being men that maybe we don't want to pass on to our sons? Now, you know, we could run a similar argument or question for daughters too, but he's a particular interest in raising boys. So just to give you one example, you know, I learned, I think, that it's not such a good idea to show too much emotion. And so that's probably not a very manly thing to do, to be in touch. But is that a useful lesson for me to have learned as an adult, and that I want to pass on to my son? We could say, no, it's probably not. Just as one example. So, you know, this idea of healing our parents is a really important part of raising kids.
Yeah, wonderful. And yes, I know you've not given us everything in the book. So where can we go and get your book?
Well, it's on Amazon,
yeah.
Kindle.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah. What can I tell you? It's probably. I think you can. I think I have set up paperbacks, but mostly I imagine most people will access it by ebooks.
Yeah, online. Yeah,
yeah.
People these days are digital. They want to read it.
I think so.
As soon as we finish, or as soon as they watch the video, they want to read it.
yes.
Yeah, and you still continue to work with couples even up to today?
I'm sorry?
Work with couples who are
yes.
in their marriages, in their relationships.
Yes, quite a lot.
And how do people get to contact you for that?
Yes, we can. And as fortunately, as I said, I'm based in Rome, but fortunately, most counsellors still are supporting couples on Zoom. So I say fortunate because that way anybody anywhere in the world can reach out for support. That may or may not continue. I think probably I would encourage your listeners, if possible, face-to-face is preferable.
Okay, that's
in person. But if I can assist remotely, then I'm very happy to do so. And so I have a blog site. If I can share my blog with you.
Yes.
It gives your listeners an opportunity to contact me.
Yeah.
The blog is called Couple Matters, but it's couple-matters. Couple-matters.
Yeah.
.com. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to tag that link to the video, and then we are going to get to see it, to read it, and they can always get in touch with you. Now, before we go, give us a parting shot. Give us something that we should live with.
Yes, well, I'm going to be speaking at my son's wedding, and shortly in the UK.
Okay.
And so I'm going to. Well, I don't want to. I don't know if he'll listen to this discussion, but I'm going to be encouraging him and all other new couples.
Yeah.
That we need to have a 5-year plan.
5-year plan.
Now I know organisations do this quite a lot. And we do it with careers, but we need to do it with our relationships too. Yeah. How is our relationship going to be better in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. How am I going to be a more healthy individual? How am I going to support my partner in his or her growth? Yeah. And to be a better person, however they want to define that. Yeah. But crucially, if I could encourage your listeners, it's the middle bit. It's that how is our couple going to be stronger in 5 years' time? And in our head, or as best intentions, that's not the place to do it. I actually encourage we need to write it down. Yeah. We need to actually make a written plan, and it's an agreement between me and my partner. This is how we're going to grow together. If we can do that, and of course, in 5 years' time, we make another one. Yeah. It's an ongoing process. But that's what I would encourage your listeners to think about. And that's regardless of how long we've been together. Yeah. I'm talking about new couples. This is an active process for all couples, and hopefully we can all do this exercise.
Okay. So thank you very much for that. And we really appreciate you being on our show. And we are wishing your son a successful marriage.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. And yes, and thank you very much. And to the listeners, thank you for listening to this show. And please go and get the book.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Go and get the book. So thank you, and have a good time.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao.